No woman could pass the Alpha's challenge until a quiet Omega stepped from the shadows. The kingdom of Tharion had always whispered of Alphas, rulers born with strength that could bend the will of men and the land itself. Their castle, perched atop jagged cliffs, seemed to grow from the very stone, its towers clawing at the sky like the talons of some great beast. Storm clouds gathered often above its walls, as if nature itself recognized the power and danger contained within. Kalen, the Alpha King, sat upon his throne in the great hall, his presence commanding silence from every soul who dared enter. Broad-shouldered and tall, with eyes like storm-dark oceans, he radiated authority. Every movement, every glance, carried the weight of someone who had faced countless challengers and emerged victorious. He was a ruler feared, respected, and, above all, untouched. Tonight, the hall was crowded with women from all corners of the kingdom. Noble daughters, warriors, healers, and rogues had come to face his challenge, a test no woman had ever passed. They had tried and failed. Each one returned to her home with bowed head and bruised pride, whispering tales of Kalen's strength and the impossibility of earning his regard. The king's voice cut through the hall like steel. "The challenge begins tonight." His gaze swept over the gathered women.
Only one shall prove herself worthy. None have succeeded.
None shall pass, unless she is more than she appears, the women murmured among themselves. Some trembled in fear. Others squared their shoulders with defiance. They had heard rumors of Kalen's abilities, unmatched strength, mastery of the ancient arts, and the way he could see through a person's spirit as easily as if it were glass. Lyra, a quiet Omega from the edge of the kingdom, had come at her own insistence, though none expected her to stand out. She was small, unassuming, with soft brown hair and eyes that seemed to observe everything while revealing nothing. She carried no fanfare, no arrogance, and no desire for recognition. Her presence was easy to overlook, a shadow among the bold and flashy. But she had learned long ago that shadows often went unnoticed until the moment they moved. As Kalen watched, he noted her stillness. Most women fidgeted, some laughed nervously, and a few even tried to meet his gaze with boldness. But Lyra did none of that. She simply stood at the edge of the hall, hands folded, her calmness almost defiant. There was something in her silence that drew his attention, though he would not admit it, even to himself. The first trial began in the arena just beyond the castle gates. It was a test of strength, courage, and spirit. Each woman was asked to face challenges designed not just to test the body, but to reveal the inner self. They climbed sheer walls, crossed rope bridges over jagged rocks, and confronted illusions crafted to show their deepest fears. One by one, the women fell. Some could not climb, others could not face the illusions, and a few faltered when Kalen himself appeared as a specter of their doubts. Their failures were met with a solemn, silent nod from the king. He did not mock. He did not smile. His silence alone was enough to crush pride. Lyra watched quietly from the back, noting the mistakes of those who tried before her. She knew fear often came not from the challenge itself, but from the desire to impress, to be noticed, or to survive by proving worth to another. She had learned to quiet the noise of expectation, to move without fear, and to let her spirit guide her. When it was her turn, the arena fell silent. Kalen observed her approach with sharp, calculating eyes. There was no trembling, no exaggerated display of courage, only a steady, measured step as if she belonged there, though no one had expected it. The first obstacle was a wall of jagged stone, taller than any mortal should climb without aid. Others had tried and fallen. Lyra's hands gripped the stone, and she felt the grooves, the imperfections, the subtle clues left by time itself. She did not force herself upward. She let her instincts guide her movements, balancing, reaching, testing each handhold. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, she climbed. When she reached the top, Kaelin raised an eyebrow. Few had ever shown such careful determination. Most had relied on brute strength or reckless speed. She relied on patience, on understanding. The next trial was the illusion of fear. Shadows twisted into forms of those the challengers had lost, those they had failed, and those who had betrayed them. Was heard. Others had screamed, fled, or struck at the illusions with desperation. Lyra stood, eyes steady, and observed. She felt the shadows brush against her mind, tempting her to flee or fight. But she remembered what she had learned in the quiet corners of the world. Fear is only powerful when it is given power. She breathed, acknowledging the forms without confronting them with violence or denial. She let them exist, let them pass, and in doing so, the illusions began to fade. Those who had faltered here had struggled because they wanted to destroy the shadows, not understand them. The final test brought her to the center of the arena, where Kaelin awaited. Presence was overwhelming, a mix of command and unspoken challenge.
He did not speak at first, merely observed her with those storm-dark eyes.
"You have reached this far," he said finally, his voice low, almost a growl. "Most do not even step into the arena."
Why do you continue?
Lyra looked at him, her gaze calm but unwavering.
I did not come to prove myself to you, she said softly. I came to see if I could stand on my own.
Kaelin was not used to such honesty. Most sought his approval, his attention, or his mercy. Had spoken to him as if he were equal, or as if he were irrelevant.
Stand on your own, he repeated, a strange note in his voice, neither mockery nor approval.
Few understand that, and fewer can endure it. Lyra did not move. She waited, unafraid of his presence, unshaken by the storm that seemed to gather in the sky above. In that moment, Kaelin felt something stir within him. A recognition. A pull he could not name. He stepped closer, and the air seemed to thrum with unspoken tension. He was the Alpha, the ruler, the king, but for the first time he felt uncertain. Wild Beck's white. She did not tremble.
She did not fall, and yet somehow she had passed where all others had failed.
You have passed the first trial, Kaelin said, though his voice carried an edge of disbelief. But the greatest trial is not strength nor courage. It is understanding me. And I am not easily understood. Lyra inclined her head slightly, a quiet acknowledgement. She did not flinch under the weight of his gaze. I do not seek to understand you, she said softly. I seek only to know myself. Whispers of astonishment, disbelief, and curiosity. No woman had ever answered so boldly or so calmly. Kaelin's eyes narrowed, though not with anger. He felt a tension in his chest, unfamiliar and uncomfortable. It was a pull he could not resist. Then we shall see, he said, his voice both a challenge and a warning. Meet me in the shadowed halls after the night falls. There we will see if your understanding or your courage can endure what most cannot. Lyra simply nodded. Her heart beat steadily, calm as the night sky. She knew that stepping into those halls would change her life forever, and perhaps, she thought quietly, it could change his as well. As the women were dismissed and the crowd dispersed, Kaelin remained, staring after her. The quiet Omega who had stepped from the shadows had not only survived the trials but had drawn something out of him that no one else had ever touched. Something older than fear. Something he had long forgotten. Outside, the first drops of rain began to fall, whispering against the stone walls as if the kingdom itself held its breath. Lyra's figure disappeared into the shadows of the castle corridors, leaving Kaelin to contemplate the strange magnetic pull of the one woman who had defied him without even trying. He did not know what the next night would bring. He only knew that he could not forget her, and that the quiet Omega who had dared to step forward had already begun to change the unyielding Alpha. And in that moment the storm above the cliffs seemed to pause, as if even the heavens awaited the meeting of two souls who might defy not just the trials of the world, but the shadows within themselves. The moon hung low over Tharion's jagged cliffs, spilling silver light across the castle's dark stone corridors. The storm that had threatened earlier had passed, leaving the air cold and sharp, smelling faintly of wet earth and salt from the sea below. Within the castle, shadows moved like living things, stretching along the walls, hiding doors and passages few dared to explore. Lyra walked through one such corridor, her steps silent, her heart steady. She had been told to meet Kaelin in the shadowed halls, a place of silence and history, where the castle's oldest secrets lingered. Unlike the great public chambers, this corridor was narrow, lined with tall windows that offered glimpses of the churning ocean far below. Candles flickered in sconces, casting dancing shadows that seemed to watch her as she passed. Kaelin waited at the end of the corridor, his figure emerging from the darkness like a living storm. Even without the great hall or the trials around him, he carried the weight of authority and danger. Dissipation time. Yet in the quiet of this space there was something different, something less rigid, more aware. "You came," he said, his voice low, careful, as if testing the air before letting words pass.
"I did," Lyra replied, keeping her tone calm. "You asked to see if I could endure what most cannot."
"I am here." Kaelin studied her. Her presence was unassuming, almost fragile at first glance. But he saw what the others had not, a strength that did not roar, a confidence that did not demand attention. She did not need him to notice her. And yet, somehow, he could not look away.
"Most believe strength is measured in the power to destroy," he said, stepping closer, the shadows seeming to bend around him.
"They do not understand that the true trial is in restraint. In understanding. 10. In knowing when to act and when to wait." Lyra nodded, keeping her eyes on his. "I understand restraint. And I have learned that strength is not always about action. Sometimes it is about knowing who you are, even when the world expects you to be someone else." A silence fell. Kaelin did not know what to say. Few had ever spoken to him like this. Not with calmness, not with clarity, not with a quiet confidence that made him want to lean in and listen, yet also fear what he might discover. "You speak boldly for one so quiet," he said finally. "Tell me, Omega, why do you seek this challenge? What do you hope to gain?" Lyra paused, considering her words carefully.
"I did not come for you, Kaelin. I came to see if I could walk my own path without being swallowed by fear or expectation. If the trials test me, I wish to know if I can survive myself first." Kaelin felt an unexpected weight in his chest.
None had ever answered him this way. Not nobles, not warriors, not even the few who dared approach him with arrogance. She was different. Different in a way he could not name, yet could not ignore. "Then you shall see," he said, his tone softer than before, yet still carrying the edge of command. "The trial of strength is one thing, but the trial of understanding, that is where most fall." He turned and led her deeper into the shadowed halls, where the air grew colder and the light dimmer. Barry, the castle seemed alive, breathing around them, remembering centuries of secrets and sins. The walls were lined with tapestries depicting past rulers, battles won and lost, and faces long forgotten. Their eyes seemed to follow them as they passed. Lyra noticed the subtle shifts in Kaelin's movements, the way he walked as if part of the shadows themselves. He was aware of every step, every echo, every flicker of light. She had been told alphas moved with purpose, but this was more than purpose. It was instinct honed by decades of ruling, fighting, and surviving.
"You carry more than strength," she said quietly, not turning to face him. "There is pain."
Memories, regret, pressed. Kaelin stopped. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, slowly, he spoke, his voice almost a whisper.
Few can see it.
Be or still can name it. Most are blinded by fear or ambition or desire. You do not seem afraid.
I do not fear what I understand, Lyra replied. I fear only what I cannot see or touch. Another silence followed, filled only by the sound of their footsteps and the occasional creak of the ancient castle.
Finally, Kaelin spoke again.
Then you may be the first to endure the trial I did not believe anyone could face. Lyra turned to him, curiosity and caution in her eyes.
And what is that trial? The trial of truth, he said, his gaze darkening. Not what you can do. Not how you can survive, but what you can see. The truth of me. The truth of this castle. And the truth of what it means to stand beside me without losing yourself.
Lyra felt a shiver, not from fear, but from the weight of his words.
Most would have fled, overwhelmed by the enormity of the challenge. But she did not.
She had learned early in life that fear is only powerful when it is given power. She nodded, ready to continue.
Kaelin led her to a hidden chamber, a place few had ever entered. The air smelled faintly of dust and old stone, but there was a strange warmth here, as if the castle itself had decided to guard its secrets. Candles burned in sconces, casting flickering light that made shadows dance along the walls. He stopped at the center of the room and gestured to the space around them.
Here, you will face not an enemy, but a mirror, a reflection of your choices, your fears, and your strength.
Most see only themselves, and are broken by what they find. You may survive, or you may not. But you will learn. But add, that learning may decide your path with me. Lyra stepped forward. Her reflection shimmered in the darkness, but it was not only her own face she saw. Shadows moved behind it, forming images of people she had loved and lost, moments of doubt, failures, and regrets. The illusions were not cruel. They were honest. They were truths she had carried quietly, locked inside herself.
Her first instinct was to look away, to deny the images.
But she remembered Kaelin's words and her own resolve. She took a deep breath and faced them. One by one she acknowledged them. She forgave herself for past mistakes. She accepted the pain she had carried in silence. And slowly the shadows began to fade. Kaelin watched from across the room. He saw how she moved, how she breathed, how she faced herself with courage. Few could endure such truths without breaking, and yet she stood tall, Unshaken, for the first time he felt something stir deep within him, a mix of respect, wonder, and something else he could not yet name. "You are stronger than you know."
He said finally, stepping closer.
"Stronger than anyone I have ever met." Lyra did not flinch. "Strength is not only in survival, Kaelin. It is in knowing yourself and choosing to move forward anyway." A long silence passed. He wanted to speak, to ask how she could be so calm, so certain, so unafraid. But words failed him. Instead, he only nodded, a rare gesture of approval. Then, from the far corner of the room, a sudden shift in shadow caught Lyra's attention. The air felt charged, almost alive, and she realized this was no ordinary reflection. It was part of the castle, part of Kaelin, part of the power he wielded and the isolation he had carried for so long.
You see it, Kaelin said, his voice softer now, almost a whisper.
Most cannot. Most turn away.
They are too afraid of what they might learn about themselves. And about me. Lyra looked into the shadows, unafraid.
I do not fear what I understand.
And I will not leave until I have learned what I must. Kaelin's eyes darkened, not with anger, but with a storm of emotion he had not expected. He realized that this quiet Omega, this small, unassuming woman, was unlike anyone he had ever met. She was fearless in ways he had forgotten, brave in ways that unsettled him, and wise beyond what most believed possible. Pans on. The candlelight flickered, and for a moment Kaelin wondered if the castle itself was watching, waiting, curious about what would happen next. He could feel the pulse of history, of power, of secrets too old to name pressing against them. And then, as if the castle had spoken its silent verdict, the shadows shifted again, forming a figure from Kaelin's past. A memory he had tried to bury, a loss that had shaped him, a reminder of the cost of power. Lyra stepped forward without hesitation. She reached out, not to fight, not to flee, but to face it. The figure shimmered, then dissipated.
She had confronted not only herself, but also the unspoken grief within Kaelin's soul.
He could not speak. He could only watch as she moved through the trial with calm, steady courage. For the first time he felt a pull, not of desire, but of something far deeper, something that whispered of trust, of understanding, and of a connection neither of them had anticipated. "You have passed," Callan said finally, his voice low, almost reverent. "But this is only the beginning." "The true trial begins when you understand the cost of standing beside me." Lyra met his gaze evenly. Kaelin nodded. "Then I am ready." Kaelin nodded, though inside he was not sure either of them was truly ready. The night outside had grown colder, the wind whispering through the cracks in the stone walls. Storm clouds gathered again on the horizon, dark and heavy, as if the kingdom itself sensed the shift that was coming. For the first time, Kaelin felt uncertain of the future. Not because he feared failure, but because he feared what might happen if he allowed himself to trust. And Lyra, for the first time, felt the weight of the path she had chosen, not because she doubted herself, but because she had glimpsed the depth of the Alpha's pain, and knew that understanding it could either bind them together or break them both. The morning after the shadowed halls, the kingdom of Tharion felt colder than usual. Mist rolled from the cliffs like pale ghosts, curling through the valleys and the forests. Birds refused to sing, and even the waves below the castle seemed restless, pounding the jagged rocks with unusual fury. Kaelin moved through the castle like the storm contained in human form. His eyes, usually as steady as stone, now flickered with a tension that no throne, no crown, and no battle had ever brought to him. He had faced armies, assassins, and curses that gnawed at his strength, but he had not faced Lyra. And the quiet Omega had unsettled him in ways he could not name.
The council of nobles gathered in the great hall, yet Kaelin hardly noticed them.
Their voices, their schemes, their petty ambitions, all seemed distant. He had other matters to consider. The shadows in the castle whispered of something deeper than politics, something older, something that would test him in ways beyond strength. Lyra waited in the training grounds, practicing quietly. The morning mist clung to her hair and cloak, and her eyes were fixed on the distant cliffs. She had not slept well. She could still feel the shadowed halls pressing against her mind, reminding her of Kaelin's unspoken grief and the burden of his power. Yet she felt ready. For the first time in her life, she did not doubt herself. Standing in silence, as if she were part of the mist itself.
"You moved well in the halls last night," he said, his voice low.
Few can endure what I showed you. Fewer still can face what comes next. Lyra turned slowly, meeting his gaze. I am not afraid. He studied her, and for the first time he wondered if any words he had ever spoken could measure her courage. Fear is not the enemy, he said. It is what we do with fear that shapes us. And tonight, you will see the test that no other woman has survived. The day passed slowly, filled with silence, observation, and quiet lessons. Kaelin showed her the history of the castle, the marks left by battles that had shaped not only the kingdom but the very stones of the walls. He told her of the alphas who had ruled before him, of the curses that had followed them, and of the darkness that sometimes lingered in the hearts of men and women alike. Lyra listened, absorbing everything. Paz. She felt a strange connection growing, not only to the castle, but to Kaelin himself. Beneath his stern exterior she sensed the weight of solitude, the burden of responsibility, and a deep ache for something he had lost long ago. She had felt pain before, but this was different. This was the pain of a soul who had carried power without companionship, who had protected a kingdom while guarding his own heart. Evening fell, and the first stars began to appear, faint and trembling in the cold sky. Kaelin led her to the edge of the cliffs, where the wind howled like a living thing and the waves crashed far below. The shadow is coming, he said, his voice rough with unspoken fear. It has waited centuries for this moment. It feeds on ambition, doubt, and despair. It will test not only you but me, and it will test everything we believe about strength, trust, and survival.
Lyra's eyes widened, yet she did not falter. I will stand with you, she said quietly. If the shadow comes, I will not run. He turned to her, his storm-dark eyes piercing. Few speak those words with truth. Most say them in hope, not certainty. Do you understand what this means? The shadow does not attack the body alone. It reaches into the mind, the soul. It finds the cracks in hearts and widens them until nothing remains. You may survive it, or you may be broken by it.
I am not afraid of being broken, Lyra replied. I am afraid of not standing when it matters most.
I will not fail you or myself. Kaelin's chest tightened. For the first time, he felt a pull towards someone he could not control, someone he could not command. He had faced countless warriors, countless challengers, and countless threats to his kingdom. But he had never faced a woman who made him feel both unsteady and alive at the same time. Night fell fully, and the castle seemed to hold its breath. The wind had grown colder, and the shadows in the corridors deepened. The first signs of the supernatural presence appeared. Faint whispers in the halls, flickers of movement at the edge of vision, shadows that did not belong to any person or object. Kaelin and Lyra moved together through the castle, silent, alert. Every instinct he had honed over decades screamed at him to protect, to strike first, to control the situation. Yet Lyra's calm presence reminded him that not every problem could be solved with strength alone. Sometimes patience, observation, and trust were more powerful than brute force. They reached the lower chambers where the shadows seemed thickest. The air was heavy, charged with an energy that made the skin tingle. Kalen's hands moved to his sides, ready for battle, but he knew this fight would require more than speed or skill. The shadow emerged suddenly, a creature of smoke and darkness, its eyes glowing like embers. It shifted constantly, changing form as if feeding on their fear. Its voice, when it spoke, was a chorus of whispers echoing their doubts and regrets. "You are not ready," it hissed. "You are weak. You are divided."
You will fail. Lyra stood firm,
Groping her mind, testing her fears, trying to force her into doubt. But she remembered the lessons of the shadowed halls. Tars. She acknowledged the fears, observed them, and let them pass without giving them power. Kalen watched in awe. Few could face the shadow and remain unbroken. But Lyra did not strike at it, nor did she flee. She stood steady, her presence calm yet commanding. The shadow turned to Kalen then, sensing his weakness, probing the spaces in his heart he had long hidden. It whispered of past failures, lost companions, and unspoken regrets. Kalen's strength wavered under its pressure, and for a moment he faltered. Lyra stepped forward, placing a hand lightly on his arm. Not in force, but in solidarity. "You are not alone," she said. "Do not let it feed on your fear." Her words, simple and true, carried a power he had never experienced. They did not demand. They did not plead. They simply reminded him of a truth he had buried. He was human, and he did not need to carry everything alone. Together they faced the shadow. Kalen's strength combined with Lyra's clarity and courage. He struck with precision, not rage. She guided him, helping him see the patterns in the creature's movements, the points where its energy wavered. The battle was not easy. The shadow tested them, probing doubts, fears, and unspoken secrets. At one point it appeared to envelop Kalen completely, feeding on the grief he had carried for years. Lyra, seeing him falter, reached into the depths of her own courage and extended it to him. "Best." Desbeth's rasped through the fluids. Desoera. "Not the king. You are stronger than fear." "Stronger than doubt. Stronger than this." The shadow hissed in frustration, shifting violently as it tried to resist her calm strength. Kalen, feeling the support she offered, found his center again. With a roar that shook the chamber, he struck the shadow, forcing it back into the darkness from which it had come. Silence fell. The castle seemed to breathe again, the tension lifting like a held breath released. Kalen and Lyra stood together, their shoulders brushing slightly, both aware of the bond that had formed in the heat of battle. It was not love yet, not in the way of hearts declaring themselves, but it was something deeper. Trust, understanding, and the recognition of shared strength. Kalen's chest heaved, his storm-dark eyes fixed on Lyra. "Few survive this," he said, his voice rough but steady. "And fewer reach this understanding." It was not about survival alone. It was about knowing that together we can face more than one of us could alone. He considered her words, realizing that the quiet Omega who had stepped from the shadows had not only survived the trials, but had changed him. She had taught him, without a word of arrogance, that strength was more than power, that trust was more than a strategy, and that courage could come in the quietest form. The night outside had grown still, the storm clouds retreating slightly to reveal a pale moon. Yet Kaelin knew the shadow had not vanished entirely. It lingered, waiting, testing, and it would return. But for now, there was a moment of peace. And in that peace, Kaelin understood something he had not allowed himself to feel in decades. He could allow himself to rely on someone else, and perhaps, in time, he could let someone into the fortress of his heart. Lyra, sensing the shift in him, remained silent. She did not push. She did not demand it. She simply stood with him, a quiet presence against the storm, and in that she showed him the meaning of true courage. Yet even as they stood together, the castle whispered warnings. The shadow had tasted the bond between them, and it would return, hungrier and more cunning. The trial was not over, and Kaelin knew that if they were to survive what was coming, they would need to trust each other more than they had ever trusted anyone before. The sky over Tharion had darkened long before nightfall, a thick canopy of clouds blotting out the moon and stars. The cliffs and castle walls shivered under the wind, and the waves below pounded the rocks with a relentless fury. The shadow, though forced back before, had returned, and this time it did not hesitate. Kaelin stood on the highest battlement, his cloak whipping around him like a living storm. Bowers, his eyes sharp and storm-dark, scanned the horizon for signs of movement. Beside him, Lyra stood silently, her cloak damp with mist, her hair clinging to her face, her calm presence steady like the cliff itself. "You can feel it," Kaelin said, his voice low, almost a growl. "The shadow knows we are ready. It has learned from its failure. It will strike with everything it has. And it will test us beyond strength or skill." Lyra nodded. Then we must be ready, not just with our power, but with our trust. Alone we are not enough. Kaelin's jaw tightened. Few had ever spoken to him like that. Most whispered flattery, others screamed in fear, but Lyra, quiet, unassuming, yet steady, spoke with truth. And in that truth, Kaelin found a strength he had not known he could draw from another down. Below, the first wave of darkness crept into the castle courtyard. The shadow moved like smoke, twisting and writhing, a living mass of fear and doubt. Its voice, a chorus of whispers, rose to fill the night.
"You are weak," it hissed.
"You are divided. You will fail." You cannot protect each other, and you cannot protect yourselves.
Kaelin's fists clenched.
Brass, and he had faced armies, assassins, curses, even betrayal from those he trusted. But the shadow was different. It did not strike with swords or claws. It attacked the mind, the heart, the very soul. Lyra stepped forward, her hand brushing against Kaelin's arm. Not in fear, not in hesitation, but in solidarity. "We are not alone," she said, "and we do not fear what we understand." Kaelin inhaled sharply, drawing strength from her words. For the first time in decades, he realized that power alone would not defeat this enemy. Only their unity could withstand it. The shadow surged forward, tendrils of darkness lashing at the walls and the battlements. Kaelin met it with his strength, striking and pushing it back, yet it continued to flow around him like water.
He realized that he could not force it to submission. The shadow fed on resistance, but it recoiled from calm, from clarity, from connection.
Lyra moved beside him, her presence steadying him. She raised her hands not in attack but in focus. The gift she had carried quietly all her life, the ability to see the echoes of pain, fear, and regret, she now extended toward the shadow. She did not fight it. She observed it, recognized it, and reflected its darkness back toward itself. Kaelin watched in awe. Her strength was quiet, subtle, yet it resonated through him like a heartbeat. For the first time, he understood that courage was not always loud, and that power did not always roar.
Sometimes it whispered, steady and unshakable.
The shadow shrieked, its tendrils retreating slightly under Lyra's influence. Colin seized the moment. He struck with precision, not rage, channeling his energy not to destroy but to contain. The shadow recoiled, twisting and lashing in fury, yet it could not break the bond forming between them. Minutes stretched like hours. The wind howled, the waves crashed, and the castle walls shook under the force of the supernatural struggle. Palin and Lyra moved as one, instinct guiding them, trust binding them. Where Kalen's strength met the shadow, Lyra's insight guided it. Where Lyra's calmness calmed the darkness, Kalen's power reinforced it. Together, they formed a balance the shadow could not penetrate. And then, in the heart of the courtyard, the shadow revealed its true form. A monstrous shape, darker than night, with eyes that burned like coals. It rose higher than the walls, towering over them, its voice a chorus of all fears and regrets it had ever sensed.
"You cannot win," it thundered. "You are divided. You are flawed. You cannot protect each other, and you cannot protect yourselves."
Kalen and Lyra did not flinch. Instead, they stepped closer together, shoulder to shoulder. Kalen's hand found hers, gripping it firmly. She did not pull away. Instead, she returned the gesture, steady and reassuring.
"You are wrong," Kalen said, his voice carrying across the courtyard.
"We are not divided. We are not alone."
"And we will not fail," Lyra added, her voice calm yet firm. "You feed on fear, shadow."
But we do not fear ourselves, or each other, or what is to come. Together we are stronger than you can ever be. The shadow roared, tendrils lashing, trying to tear them apart. But they did not falter. The bond between Kalen and Lyra was no longer fragile. It was forged in trials, in trust, in courage. The shadow could not comprehend it. It could not twist or distort the unity they had formed. With a final surge, Kalen struck the shadow at its core, while Lyra focused her gift, reflecting its darkness back upon itself. There was a moment of silence, as if the world itself paused. Then, with a shriek like thunder, the shadow dissipated, retreating into nothingness, leaving only the mist and the faint smell of smoke behind. Kalen fell to one knee, exhausted but alive. Lyra knelt beside him, her hand on his shoulder. Neither spoke at first. The storm outside had ceased, leaving only the whisper of the waves and the quiet of the night. Finally, Kalen looked at her, his storm-dark eyes softening. You changed this," he said, voice low and awe-filled. "I could not have done it alone." Lyra shook her head gently. "You would have tried. But together, we were stronger. That is the truth of it." He had never admitted weakness, not to anyone. But with Lyra, he felt the weight lift, replaced with something unfamiliar. Trust, respect, and something that might grow into something more. The castle seemed to sigh, as if it had watched and waited for this moment for centuries. Kalen stood slowly, offering Lyra his hand, took it, and together they faced the castle courtyard, the cliffs, and the horizon beyond. The first time the kingdom of Tharian felt calm, not because danger was gone forever, but because those who faced it had emerged stronger, united, and aware of the bonds that gave them strength.
Days passed, and the castle slowly returned to its usual rhythm.
Nobles whispered of the storm and the shadow, but none could deny the change in Kalen. He moved differently now, not as a solitary alpha who ruled with fear, but as a leader who understood the weight of connection, of trust, of shared strength. Lyra remained at his side, quietly, unassuming, yet impossible to overlook. She did not seek power or attention. She simply walked the path she had chosen, steady and calm, and in doing so she taught the Alpha King more than any trial or battle ever could. In time, Kalen began to show the softness he had hidden for decades. He learned to rely on Lyra's insight, to share burdens he had always carried alone, and to trust not only in her strength, but in the bond they had forged. And Lyra, in turn, discovered a courage she had never known, an ability to stand beside a man feared by all and to face darkness with calm, quiet certainty. The castle, once a place of shadows and whispers, became a home, not only for Kalen, but for the quiet Omega who had stepped from the shadows and changed the heart of the Alpha forever. And as the sun rose over the cliffs, painting the waves with gold, Kalen and Lyra stood together, knowing that storms would come again, shadows would rise, and trials would test them, but they would face them as they had faced the darkness before, not alone, but together. The kingdom of Tharian had survived the shadow, but more importantly, its Alpha King had survived something far harder, the letting go of isolation and the allowing of another soul into the fortress of his heart. Lyra smiled quietly at the horizon. She had stepped from the shadows, endured the trials, faced the darkness, and found not only strength, but trust and connection. And she knew finally that some bonds are stronger than fear, stronger than doubt, and stronger than even the darkest shadows. Kalen reached for her hand, squeezing gently, his storm-dark eyes softened by gratitude and something more. "You are unlike anyone I have ever met," he said, voice low.
And you are not as alone as you believed,
Lyra replied.
You will live.
The wind carried their words across the cliffs, mingling with the sound of the waves. And in that moment, the kingdom of Tharian felt whole, not because the shadow had been defeated, but because two souls had found each other in the midst of darkness, and together they had become stronger than any challenge.